When this kind of case happens, a lot of theories come up, especially from those who were close to the victim. But as the investigation moves forward, the information that comes out shocks everyone. Absurd lies, shocking cover-ups, and everything you can imagine that's the worst of the worst. Of course, I'll tell you everything in detail. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome everyone, and this case happened in Guatemala and has a very unusual development. By the way, the whole case is very well documented in today's episode. So here's a tip. Grab a snack, get comfortable because there's a lot for us to learn. If you can leave a like, a comment, even if it's just an emoji. If you can't become a channel member right now, that's totally fine too. Please consider it, but if not, just stay with me until the end. That means a lot. The main character of today's episode is Cristina Molina, and she was born on April 9, 1977 in Guatemala City, which is the capital of Guatemala. Cristina grew up with her parents, Angeles Molina and Juan Luis Siekavizza, and also with a sister named Susana. Still very young, Cristina married Roberto Beretta de Leon. And this Roberto was a guy from a family with great purchasing power in the country. He worked as a manager at a passenger transport company in Guatemala and was the son of Beatriz de Leon de Barreda, who at the time was part of the Supreme Court of Justice in Guatemala. When Cristina was about 25 years old, she gave birth to the couple's first child, Roberto Rosé, who was nicknamed Robertito. She quit her job to fully focus on her son and family. After about 4 years, the couple's second child was born, Maria Mercedes. Cristina and Roberto seemed like the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. Or at least that's how it seemed and what most people believed. They lived in a luxury condominium located in the Los Manantiales neighborhood. So on July 5th, 2011, a Tuesday, Cristina threw a birthday party for Robertito. At their house, the couple welcomed guests, and everything went as planned. So much so that right there, in the excitement of the party, let's say several arrangements were made. Like, for example, a lunch with the parents, a weekend outing with a couple of friends. No one suspected a thing. But that moment right there would be the last day they would see Cristina. The next morning, Wednesday, the couple reportedly resumed their routine. Roberto took the kids to school and Cristina went for a run in a nearby park. Afterwards, she did some shopping and picked up the kids from school. That night, the family had dinner and went to sleep. A day like any other, but is it really? On Thursday, July 7th, in the morning, Roberto traveled to the countryside because he needed to. Actually, he had a work commitment. Cristina's parents prepared lunch for her, just as they had agreed during the little party on Tuesday. But since she didn't show up, Angeles and Juan Luis tried to call their daughter on the phone, but they weren't successful. At that moment, they call Roberto, who says he received a call from his children's school. Apparently, his wife hadn't gone to pick up the children at school. And because of that, one of their classmates' mothers had taken the children home. So to her house then, the couple's kids, something was wrong because Cristina would never do that. Cristina's mother then goes to her daughter's house to check what was happening to see if everything was okay. She felt a little more at ease when she saw that her grandchildren were really there at the house, but there was no sign of her daughter. Everything was very strange. And it got even stranger when she discovered that in Cristina's room, her cell phone, her documents, and her wallet were still there. The woman, already quite worried about this, talks to her grandchildren who say they hadn't had any contact with their mother that day. Angeles then goes out and asks the neighbors in the condominium if they had seen anything that morning, if they had met her daughter, talked to her. Everyone there answers no. With all this happening, Angeles and Juan, Cristina's parents, then file a missing person report with the police regarding their daughter. While all this was unfolding, Roberto returned from his business trip. When he gets home, he goes straight to the police to talk about what could have happened to his wife. Roberto then recalls in this first statement that Cristina had gone out for a walk at 6 in the morning around that day, and since then, He hadn't been able to talk to his wife anymore. At that moment, the husband's suspicion was that Cristina's disappearance could be related to organized crime. Why? No one knew yet. Since the husband was very worried and wanted to help, he then hired private detectives to assist the prosecutor's office in Guatemala to help with the official investigation. And with this information from the husband, the police followed the initial line of investigation of kidnapping, and the investigation focused on the park where she supposedly went running that morning. But strangely, they didn't find any evidence nor any witnesses indicating that Cristina had gone running that morning. Cristina's family later stated that their daughter had not received any threats in the days prior, and besides that, they didn't receive any calls demanding money, for example, as ransom. Nothing in the days before indicated that Cristina might be in danger. Susana, Cristina's sister, then travels to San Jose Pinula, which is the city where Cristina lived, and that city is about 30 kilometers from Guatemala City. Susana went there to help with the search, and it didn't take long for her to say that Roberto's statements, her sister's husband, about Cristina's disappearance seemed suspicious. Unlike their social appearance, Susana told the police that everyone close to the couple, the really close ones, knew they were not going through a good time. Cristina repeatedly showed signs of frustration that, according to Susana, demonstrated isolation, financial limitations, lack of trust, and excessive control from Roberto. However, she also made it clear that neither she nor her family members had witnessed any violent actions. For instance, from her brother-in-law, like aggression, mistreatment, or similar actions toward her sister. In addition, Susana said that her whole family was committed to helping with the search. But she didn't see that from Roberto or from the people closest to him, so what did they have at that moment? It's a husband claiming he didn't know about his wife's whereabouts, suggesting that it could be related to organized crime, to her disappearance. But the sister says it's not quite like that there's something going on, something fishy, and the police are left clueless, needing to investigate several different leads. For Susana, Roberto and his family members had no real interest in looking for or finding her sister at that point, when everyone was already very worried. For her, something was being hidden at that moment. This is Susana's point of view. Okay, everyone? Susana also said that ever since they started searching for her sister, Roberto actually seemed to show some strange behaviors, even disappearing in quotes for 2 days. And about that, Roberto said he was very stressed with the whole situation and that he needed to take a break to relax. Along those lines, one of Cristina's best friends, named Stephanie, stated at that time that she tried to call her the day before she disappeared. They spoke that day at around 20 to 7 in the evening. But shortly after, Cristina hung up, saying that her husband was arriving and that she needed to make dinner. And at that moment, another theory from Roberto, the husband, comes up after those statements, right? That theory about organized crime and so on. When he realized that this wasn't holding up, Roberto then proposed another theory, which already raises suspicions, doesn't it? At that moment, he tells the police that Cristina was taking medication for depression and that most of the time she was completely out of control. This would have happened because they had tried to have a third child, but when she got pregnant at 3 months, she suffered a miscarriage. That's why Roberto believes that his wife might have tried to take her own life. A hypothesis that is perhaps more, let's say, minimally acceptable than the first if you don't know all the other elements. But with all the statements from Cristina's family and this spontaneous change of mind from Roberto, it's no longer organized crime, now it's depression. The police did the basics. They started to take a closer look at Roberto, especially because he had clearly tried to divert and delay the investigation. And it seems the police weren't making much of an effort to follow that line either. Look at this, guys. Up until then, they hadn't even checked the victim's house, but now finally the police went to the couple's residence to take a closer look for evidence there. Although, at first glance, everything seemed spotless, a luminol test revealed that in the master bedroom, in other words, the couple's bedroom, there were bloodstains. In addition, a comforter had disappeared from the house. These discoveries caused the case to shift from a supposed kidnapping or something like that to a homicide, and Roberto was now the main suspect. The key witness. On July 18th, the family's housekeeper gave her first statement to the police, and she ends up becoming a key piece in putting this puzzle together. She states that she hadn't seen Cristina on the morning of the disappearance and that the night before, everything seemed normal in the house. The investigation moves forward, and several analyses are conducted on the remains of bodies found during that period, but none of them belong to Cristina. At this point, the investigation seemed to be stuck. That's why Cristina's family and several supporters held a demonstration. More than 500 people, including Roberto and supposedly some members of his family, were also present. But something was about to happen that would change everything because on August 3rd, while the search for Cristina was still ongoing, Roberto disappeared with the children. Of course, this increased the suspicion about him even more, so an international arrest warrant was issued. After that, the investigation found out that the housemaid, a woman named Petrona, had not been at her employer's house on the morning of July 7th, but rather at Roberto's parents' house, and this lie led to the woman being arrested and becoming a key piece in finally solving the case. From then on, this made Petrona feeling safe with the officers, with the police, with the investigators. She decides to tell the truth about what happened on the day Cristina disappeared, different from what she had said in her first statement. Remember that she said that the night before everything was fine and that the next morning she didn't see the woman at the house? So now she assured that on the night of July 6th, the eve of the disappearance, the couple had a heated argument. An argument so intense that she said she took the couple's children and locked herself in a room in the house with both children so they wouldn't hear or witness that bad situation for them. So she turned the television up really loud until the yelling started to die down. When she leaves that room, she sees Cristina's body in one of the rooms and also notices a pool of blood. Roberto, she says, forced the maid to clean up that pool of blood, the whole scene. And then he takes the maid to his parents' house. That's why on the 7th she didn't go there. And Petrona, the maid, had to stay at his parents' house all morning that day. During those hours, Roberto's parents allegedly threatened Petrona so that she would keep it a secret. In fact, they even said they would kill her and do the same to her nephews if she said anything against their monster son. The investigation continued, and weeks later, 3 more people were arrested. Oscar Cuevas, who was hired to locate Cristina and try to divert the investigation. Actually, you remember, Roberto hired more than one private investigator to supposedly help with the official investigation. Yeah, actually, it was a planned piece of the puzzle to confuse the game. Then the other arrest was Joaquin Flores, who is Roberto's brother-in-law, and also Javier Ruiz, who supposedly helped the accused remove Cristina's body from the house. With so many people being arrested and solid testimonies, it seemed like the investigation was moving forward quickly, right? However, that wasn't quite the case because the investigation was actually very slow in the first few weeks. Led to suspicions that Roberto's mother, the Mrs. Leon, do you remember her? The one I said is a lawyer and a judge on a superior court, started to be suspected of being involved, pulling strings behind the scenes to cause this delay. Actually, the woman was a former magistrate of a Supreme Court there in Guatemala. So, the impression was that she tried to stop the investigations from continuing using her influence. And in fact, she paved the way so that her son wouldn't be found or prosecuted. The suspicions against her increased when the police investigated the woman's bank transactions. In those transactions, they found evidence that she had sent money abroad. Was it for her son? It was clear that Roberto had his mother's support while he was on the run, probably in another country, with his children. The fact is that since Cristina's disappearance, everything had worked in Roberto's favor. Mere coincidence? The police investigated that baseless theory about organized crime. It took them a while to go to Roberto's house and the missing person's house to check if anything had happened there. The suspect's mother tried to delay the search for her son, who was already fleeing. Because of all this, on October 20, 2011, Mrs. Ofelia de Leon was arrested, accused of obstructing justice in the investigations in the case of Cristina's disappearance. In addition, due to the testimony of Petrona, the maid, Ofelia was accused of threatening her so that she wouldn't say anything about what she had seen there, especially not to testify against Roberto. However, Ofelia's influence in the judiciary continued surprisingly to carry weight. It's strange but expected. The police always look at the husband first in a disappearance. Normal procedure. The police searched for Roberto throughout Guatemala and nearby areas, but had no success. Some suspected that he was in the United States, maybe in Panama or in some remote place in Guatemala itself. From then on, the Guatemalans started to get outraged by the lack of resolution in the case. Not just because of Cristina's disappearance, but also due to other similar cases. Thousands of people began to demand justice in the face of a growing epidemic of femicides that was happening there in the country. The Siekavizza family, Cristina's family, right? Organized marches throughout Guatemala City to support victims of domestic violence. Also, Susana, Cristina's sister, and her sister's friends founded Voices for Cristina, an association against gender-based violence. And it was only on February 2nd, 2012 that the case was transferred from the prosecutor's office against organized crime, just imagine, to the Special Prosecutor's Office for Crimes Against Life, now led by Prosecutor Hector Canastug. And now, if you think things were already bizarre, this is where it's going to start getting completely unusual. Check this out. The case file indicated that Roberto had a lover who was supposedly the daughter of a drug trafficker from El Progreso, which is a department in Guatemala. According to this theory, Cristina had found out about this extramarital affair. So she confronts her husband, really angry, and he feels cornered and ends up killing Cristina. Afterwards, Roberto contacts members of a cartel there to help make his wife's body disappear somewhere in a field in El Progreso. Supposedly, it was a property belonging to the father of his alleged lover, who was only identified as the Tigre de Marazan, with ties to the Sinaloa cartel. Yeah, it's all just really bizarre. But let's stay tuned, guys, because it's a part of history that's being, it seems like that incidental thing. So, could it be that all this made-up story that started showing up now, wasn't it already being plotted, in the sense that the first thing he talked about was organized crime, or when he mentioned organized crime, is that when it gave rise to creating this hypothetical cause? What it seems is that either way, it looks like the intention was to hinder the investigation, right? Maybe to confuse public opinion, since maybe his mother had a hand in it, as she had influence in the justice system. I'm not sure, something like that. Anyway, continuing with this account. According to this fanciful story, Cristina's body would have been hidden by Roberto with the help of these criminals, in a cartel's grave, which was later covered with cement. Now comes an unusual part of the story, just watch. An informant identified only as Giovanni Velasquez supposedly showed up. And this guy presented some very specific details about an alleged connection between the crime and drug trafficking. Similarly, to confirm, according to Giovanni, two brothers named Joaquim and Luis said that at the beginning of July, a pickup truck and two vans supposedly arrived at a farm called El Carme, which would belong to a man also identified as a trafficker named Rutilio. These visitors just showed up there out of nowhere, calmly parked their cars there, and there was a body inside wrapped in a carpet. So they got there and said, "Oh, our order is to bury this here, about 200 meters from the Motagua River." From the characteristics of the body, one of them said it had delicate features, some delicate traits. So those guys involved in the crime believed it was a woman, while this informant Giovanni was providing this information. Roberto, feeling all the pressure, all this mess that was happening, on August 4th, he supposedly met with his alleged lover and confessed his intention to run away with his children. According to this same version of events, the woman's father even agreed to help Roberto, but said, "No, the children will stay here. You can run away, but the children stay." Roberto got very upset, right? He didn't want to leave the kids. They started an argument, and the father of his supposed lover, a big-time drug dealer involved with organized crime, pulled out a gun and finished off Roberto. And after that, he supposedly ordered the children to be killed as well. And all the bodies in this case would have been taken to the same place where Cristina was supposedly buried. But we've just finished this really crazy part of the story. These statements are completely full of gaps because, it really seems like a story thrown in there just to confuse things or to create lines of investigation to hinder or delay. All of this based on an assumption. It was even formally presented to the prosecution shortly after. A major search was even carried out on a suspect's property, which lasted about a month. But they didn't find anything, The facts didn't point to that. In other words, for Cristina's family and friends, all this hypothesis was nothing but empty talk, a crude maneuver to divert attention and interrupt the investigations into Roberto's whereabouts. So getting back now to what is factual. On March 25, 2013, Mrs. Ophelia, the judge mother of the fugitive husband, was released on bail on the condition that she serve house arrest. In the middle of that year, Roberto was still on the list of Guatemalans wanted by Interpol, and on many national police vehicles there was a poster with his photo offering 15,000 quetzals, which is the currency in Guatemala, to anyone who provided information about his whereabouts. Roberto's mysterious whereabouts, along with his children, remained unknown until, in November 2013, the Survivors Foundation received an email with a photograph attached. In that email, in that photograph specifically, you could see a man named Carlos Villarreal. He was a single father, overweight, who claimed that his wife had abandoned him and that he was now responsible for the young children. He didn't work because he had a large inheritance, but he was involved in the community's social circles. The members of this Survivors Foundation went to investigate this, and it didn't take long for them to connect the dots. Those were the missing children, Cristina's children, and that man didn't look like Roberto. But immediately they took this information to the authorities, this email, this photo, the location, and everything else. Then the Guatemalan authorities got in touch with Mexican authorities where this email, photo, and everything else originated. Both nations then carried out a joint operation to intercept this supposed Carlos and these two children. So on November 8, 2013, the suspect was arrested in Mérida, Yucatan in Mexico. There, he had nowhere else to run. It was confirmed that it was really him, Roberto, who had completely changed his physical appearance. Both he and his two sons were using IDs with fake names. Roberto was immediately extradited to Guatemala, and the appearance of Cristina's two sons was a relief for her family since they feared for the children's lives. Both were placed in the custody of their mother's family after a conflict with Roberto's family, who also demanded to have custody of the children under their responsibility. And so, 2 years after Cristina's disappearance, the legal process was just beginning. During the first hearings, the version of events was given by the couple's eldest son, who confirmed that second statement from the housemaid. You remember she said the couple fought and she hid with the kids, right? That's correct. The son stated that he was in a room of the house on July 6, 2011 while his parents were arguing. And the fight had ended with the murder of his own mother. Prosecution. On February 20th, 2014, Roberto Barreda was charged with the crimes of femicide, child abuse, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution was now able to reconstruct what had happened to Cristina on the day she was last seen. Prosecutors say Cristina and Roberto had a major argument in Robertito's room, one of their children, on July 6, 2011. At a certain point, the fight escalated physically and the victim ended up being murdered by blows from her husband. Afterward, Roberto used a pickup truck to move the body to several places around the country to hide it. With his mother, the former judge, he hides the crime evidence. His vehicle was cleaned and even had the floor mats replaced. Even though everything was ready to start the trial against Roberto, the case was delayed again. The court didn't send Roberto and his mother, Mrs. Ophelia, to trial until 2015. And Mrs. Ophelia was being accused of threatening the maid to keep quiet and also of covering up her son's crime. For the development of the trial, the participation of 15 experts and 85 witnesses had been admitted, as well as the study of 108 documents and 31 pieces of evidence that were requested by the prosecution. But it would still be years before the trial began. In 2019, the judge in the case finally ordered the case to go to trial. And at that point, besides Roberto, the accused included his mother, who was charged with making threats, and the private investigator Oscar Celada Cuevas, the one who was hired to help with the case. You remember, right? A hearing was set for April 15th, 2020. However, the case took an unexpected turn. On July 21, 2020, Roberto Barreto was admitted to the public hospital center due to a respiratory infection, in this case, COVID-19. This postponed the trial once again until further notice. But in the following days, Roberto started to get worse, had complications, and his body did not respond to the treatment. Roberto Barreto died in the hospital a few days later. However, the case continued for his mother, Ofelia de Leon, and also for Oscar Celada Cuevas. Meanwhile, the agency appointed by the public ministry kept searching for Cristina's remains, because they never said where they were, carrying out exhumations in several cemeteries of people who were buried without identification, but nothing. It was only on September 30th, 2020 that the court began its work and granted Mrs. Ofelia de Leon an opportunity criterion. That's one legal tool that lets the public prosecutor's office choose to start a criminal case or lessen a defendant's sentence. The consequence of that is that Ofelia should no longer have to stand trial. In the case of Cristina Siekavizza, the only thing she should do is provide compensation to Petrona by paying the housemaid from the house where the woman disappeared about 4,000, 3,000 reais more or less. And as if that wasn't absurd enough, the court also granted the opportunity criterion to the private investigator. The man had to pay 10,000 quetzals to Cristina's children. That's it. In addition, he was not allowed to have contact with those involved in the case. In January 2021, the Special Prosecutor's Office for Cristina's case continued the exhumation process in cemeteries. The goal, of course, was to find her remains there, but it didn't happen. In summary, from November 2020 to June 2021, up to 47 exhumations were carried out in 6 departments of the country. Despite several days of intensive searching and a lot of effort, Cristina was not found. In 2024, the prosecutor's office in charge of the case revealed that the phone, which years ago had been classified as belonging to Roberto Barreto, had become a key piece in the case. The device records indicated that the man was on the route where the searches were being carried out, on the same day that his wife's disappearance was reported. So, guys with the phone, they got access to the global positioning system tracking and placed the guy right there where he was, watching the searches. And what I have to say is that up until the closing of this episode, the public prosecutor's office there remains committed to clarifying the case and seeking justice. For Cristina's family, the worst part of all this is that their mourning continues. There's no closure, even though many clues point to what probably happened. You don't have, right, that moment when you say, now it's over. And Cristina's case wasn't just a before and after. For the family, but for the whole country too. Thanks to the case's huge impact, violence against women and femicides were covered by media in every state of Guatemala. And above all, this case showed how difficult it is to achieve justice when corruption is part of the judicial system. Wow, it's really unsettling to see how this turned out, isn't it? Cristina's family is in endless mourning, unable to find her for a proper farewell. And everyone who was involved, one died, and the others who helped, despite all this mess, basically got away unscathed. They got off scot-free. It's unfortunate, but I'd like your opinion. Comments are open. Thanks for your company. A kiss from the redhead. See you next episode.